Okay, so we're going to go ahead and get into this for chapter 4. Okay, this is going to be talking about preventing fraud. Much of this we've already discussed. And so again, it's all about making sure you have a good organizational culture and that you have the proper internal controls in place to implement that. You have management that's going to follow through. You have identified the punishment for committing fraud, what's going to happen. If somebody commits fraud, that you properly vet employees and whatnot. And so I'm going to just kind of go through this pretty quickly because you can read this in your textbook. I'm just going to give you some of my personal experience and kind of explain a couple things. So here we have a trusted bank employee that's, stole $600,000. We can kind of identify with that because we had the AEA crime that happened a number of years ago. That person who stole that $600,000, they lost their retirement, they lost their home. I can't imagine what their poor family had to go through, but that's what happens when you commit crimes. If we can prevent fraud before it happens, we can save a whole lot of money. So you may think that you're spending quite a bit of money by enabling or implementing all these fraud prevention techniques and policies and procedures, but in the end, you save a whole lot more money. It's good for your business as well because it makes your organizational culture they're thriving on honesty and ethics, and they know that they're going to be. Sorry, the drink I just took went down the wrong. Well, as my mom used to say, it went down the wrong tube. But anyhow, you're creating a more secure environment for your employees as well. And so here they're talking about everyone can be dishonest. And in the previous chapter, we talked about the 10-80-10 rule. And that's very true. Things can happen to anyone and fraud can be committed. In here, we're creating a culture of honesty and openness. So you need a well-defined code of conduct. You need an open door policy, not operating on a crisis basis, and hiring honest people, providing an employee assistance program. So they're going to focus in on there. And so one of the things that I'm going to mention is in this portion, I'll talk about all kinds of things all throughout. But and I'm going to go through, like I said, I'm going to go through this pretty fast because I'm just going to tell you about my experiences, things that I have seen. I worked at a great job. Cocopine Indian Housing was a wonderful place to work at. I worked there almost 10 years. I then went to a retail store. There's 2 stores operated here in Yuma, Arizona, operated by a mom and pop corporation. Was a corporation. I went in healthy. How do I know I was healthy? Well, every week at the tribe, somebody would come by and they would find out, does anybody want to check their sugar? And so I got in line with everybody else. Hey, they were offering it, I'm going to do it. And I was bad. I'm going to tell you, my breakfast consisted of a thirst buster that was half Mountain Dew and half fruit punch and a candy bar, usually a Butterfinger. That was my breakfast. And so maybe an hour after eating my breakfast, they come in and do these testing. And I would test under 100 in terms of my sugar, which is very normal. It's where you're supposed to be. Well, I went to another job. I wanted to expand my accounting experience, and I went to this other job. And within a year, I was diabetic. And it wasn't because of my eating habits. It was because of the amount of stress and how it took a toll on my body. I was always working in crisis mode, and I ended up getting diabetes. It just really messed with my body. I know when I'm at an extreme amount of stress, I get really sick. And I get sick because my sugar goes up, my blood pressure goes up, I get tired, I get headaches, I get emotionally, mentally fatigued. It just really messes with your body as a whole. So that's just kind of one of the things that I want to put in there, that that crisis basis really does affect people in a bad way. Okay, so here they're just kind of giving you some visuals. 25% of fraud is committed by employees who have worked 3 years or less, so watch them. Consistent with studies showing that nearly 30% of Americans are dishonest. I would hate to think that, but you know, what am I gonna, I can't argue. I don't have the statistics in front of me, and they obviously do. Applicant screening can exclude dishonest candidates, and that's so true. First step is assessing their resume. Says here 55% of Americans have lied on their resume at least once. I know I haven't, so I'm going to be in the 45%, but I have seen cases of people lying on their resume or just completely dishonest in the hiring process. And so here they're showing you what type of lies have happened. So I'm going to share with you one of the cases. So I was on a screening committee, and so I've been on a number of hiring committees for various different organizations. I was on this one screening committee, and the person was interviewing over Zoom. So we were hiring somebody from out of state. And they were so amazing on Zoom, this person. They were dressed all snazzy. They had all the answers. Their attitude was appropriate. They had a whole lot of self-confidence. They just sounded amazing. And they ended up getting the position. But the person who came and the person who did the interview were two different people. The person who came reminded me of a greasy, they call him a greasy bohunk, which is kind of, it kind of might even be a discriminatory term, but I just remember it from 16 Candles, watching that movie, because the guy was really gross. He looked like he came from some type of mafia, low class, just kind of sleazy kind of person. And I guess you can define that for anybody. But anyhow, this guy kind of gave you that vibe that he was kind of sleazy and gross and slimy. He ended up getting terminated like 6 weeks after he started, because he just wasn't the same person who interviewed. It was, they somehow or other they committed this fraud. Wrong person. So this stuff happens. Another case, I went and hired, I was on the interviewing committee. I was hiring a secretary for somebody, an executive secretary. And this one woman interviewed so well, and she looked the part of, you know, an executive assistant. She looked like she was organized. She had it together. She was going to be a good fit for our office. We hired her. And when all was said and done, okay, and by the way, I'm going to tell you, she was also very, very pretty, very, very petite, hair always done, makeup always done, nails always done. I hate to say it that way, but she was very put together, well put together. Well, she couldn't do the job. What she did do was she would bat her eyes at all the male employees, and she would get them to help her do her job. So she ended up getting the men to do her work. Women, we were just kind of like, just looking at her like we're going to slap her in the head, because, you know, it's like, we got our own work to do. We're, you know, don't play this. I'm a weak female kind of stuff. No, I don't play that game. And it should have given us a big clue when we ordered tamales and we had tamales in the office, and she tried to eat her tamale with the husk on. That should be the biggest clue that she doesn't know what she's doing. So went on, yada, yada, yada. Ended up going on a training event, and we went to Las Vegas. It was either Reno or Las Vegas. Like, I know it was in Nevada. And it was me, the executive director, and her, and maybe one other person, but that's who I remember went. Well, she was married, but she was out and she was finding her next husband. I'll just put it that way. And so I'm sitting there and I'm talking to the executive director, and he's looking at me like, what is going on here? And I'm looking at him going, I don't know what's going on here. Anyhow, we ended up terminating her pretty quickly. And when we went and we looked at her computer, because you got to pull all that data down and whatnot. We found that she was putting out resumes saying that she was performing tasks that were actually what the executive director was doing. So she was taking credit for all his work and sending that out on her resume. So just anyhow, so stuff like that does happen. So you got to kind of pay attention, and when you're interviewing, you've got to look for clues. Okay, so they talk about liabilities for poor hiring. And so the only thing I can think of right here that could really be that I can relate to is if a hospital hires somebody without doing any background checks and whatnot, and they say that they're a surgeon, then come to find out the person never passed medical school. And if somebody gets hurt, then of course that's a huge liability. Okay, verify their resume and application. There's a couple clues here. One, if you need to ask for an official resume or official from the registration or registrar, ask for their official transcripts. Okay. That way they're sent to you sealed. Nobody's opened them up and looked at them. They can't mess with them. It's not electronic where you can go and do Photoshop on anything. You get the original transcripts. And it may cost you $5, but that may save you a whole lot of money in the end. So you can get the original transcripts. You can go in and make phone calls to previous employers. Normally, employers are only allowed to answer a couple of questions, like specific questions, which is, did this person work for you? Yes. Well, from what date to when date? Would you hire this person again? Those are pretty much the only questions you're really allowed to answer. But if I knew the person, I worked with them, and I thought highly of them, I'm probably going to say, oh, they're an amazing employee. You are so lucky they applied. If any other question is asked of me in terms of, can you answer this? I would usually, if they're not a good employee, I would pretty much refuse to answer anything else. I'm sorry. I'm not allowed to respond to that. If I'm saying that, now if I have nothing good to say about somebody, even just kind of like on, I could be, basically you got to read between the lines is what you got to do. If they will only answer when they worked, and if they're hireable. Okay, if they're hireable again, yes, okay, good. Maybe it's just in their policy not to say anything more. No, well, can you expand upon that? Can you give us, what do you think? And they say, nope, not going to tell you anything. That's a big clue right there. If I don't have anything good to say, I'm not going to say anything at all. Read between the lines. Okay. Restrictions on your resume verification. So you can see here some of the topics that you're not allowed to talk about. You can't talk about marital status, family planning. You can't look at me and talk about my disabilities. You can't sit there. I already mentioned I have diabetes. You can't talk to me about my diabetes and my health. And what am I trying to do about it? That's not my employer's business. Nationality, race, or ancestry. I'm Irish. If that's, that helps you any. I have I think it's 70% Irish, English, and Scottish, but I only claim the Irish part. Okay. Make sure you certify that the information is true and correct. Go and do your background. I mean, you can, like I showed you, you can do free background checks, but then you can also pay for background checks as well. In one of these slides coming up, it's going to talk about credit and whatnot. Not everybody has the best credit. Sometimes we just have bad luck in life. But if I'm going to hire somebody, I'm not going to hire anybody that has a credit score less than 600. Okay, and that's a pretty average credit score to have. So when we're going into the 5s and the 4s, I'm going, that's people making bad decisions. So I don't want to take that risk in an accounting position. 600, well, maybe they had a bad luck in life. Maybe they lost a job and they couldn't pay their bills for a while. And so that's where their credit score ended up becoming bad. But 4 or 5s, anything below a 600, that's just bad decisions. Maybe it's not, but that's where I'm going to cross. That's where I'm putting my line down. Make sure that in the hiring process, it is stated that if we find out that you're not telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, that you can be terminated at any time because of the falsified documents that you submitted for hiring. Train your selection committee. In selection committees that I've been involved with here at Arizona Western, we ask the same questions to all of our candidates so that we can't say that there was any type of bias or unfairness. Go in there and again, treat everybody exactly the same. Now, in accounting, I'm sneaky because that's just how I am. So when I have always hired for accounting positions, I want to know if they are just pretending to know accounting or if they really know it. So I'll throw one out there. If it's a standard position, I'll say, what's the expanded accounting equation? We all know it. Assets equals liability plus equity minus revenue. Whoops. Completely messed that one up, didn't I? Assets equals liability plus equity plus revenue minus expenses. There we go. See, got to pay attention because we make mistakes. And then I would, if I had some more questions, I'd ask about some other different topics. So what's a differential analysis? What's this? What's that? I had one time where I asked somebody a very specific question, and I want to say it had to do with fixed assets or something, or fair market value. I don't know. It had something to do with a higher level topic of accounting that this person should be able to handle. And it was like I asked them, and I'm going to use I'm going to make something up. So I asked them about fair market value. How would they classify fair market value for various investments, da, 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 da. And then they responded with depreciation and amortization, which has nothing to do with fair market value in reference to investments. So, and they just BS'd me. They just threw in a bunch of words and they made no sense whatsoever. So go ahead and ask them those questions. Make sure you have your employees hired and you train them. Make sure they understand the expectations of the workplace and what you will and will not tolerate. Make sure you talk about fraud and you talk about what would happen if they commit fraud and what actions would be taken against them. Make sure you talk about what happens if you see fraud. What are your actions that you can take if you see fraud? What are you expected to do? Like call the anonymous hotline, so on and so forth. Make it an expectation of honesty, of trust, of ethics. Have a good corporate conduct, ethical expectations, open door, open access, positive personnel and operating procedures, and make it a positive work environment. When your employees are vested mentally into your company, they're less likely to commit fraud. If I feel good about where I'm working, I'm going to protect that company no matter what. If I feel like I can't stand the company, okay, I'm not saying me, because if I can't stand the company, I'm going to go find another job. But theoretically, people could commit fraud. Here are the consequences of unacceptable behavior. This is how much it costs for unacceptable behavior. Show the employees the cost in terms of how much of a salary they have just lost because of fraud. So here, what could they do to make a positive low fraud environment? Oh, this one here. So they're talking about what's wrong. Okay, I'm going to tell you right now. This is biased because only one manager is making the decision. You could have a manager who may be biased or is discriminating against an employee. Maybe they just don't get along, and that's okay. Not everybody has to get along with everybody. You have to be professional, but you don't have to be buddy-buddy. And so maybe that's what's happening here. Somebody's they just professionally don't get along with each other, and there creates a bias. And you don't want to have that one manager making that decision because it could be a very biased decision. Okay. Here we go, going back in, talking about culture of honesty, openness, and assistance. I can't even talk. Implementing employee assistance programs. Here in this situation, I think AWC has a really good one. We offer, like, I can sell my sick leave to human resources, or give my sick leave to human resources. I should say it like that. In case somebody has like an extended family medical issue and they ran out of sick leave, I can hand mine over. That's an example of one. I know here at Arizona Western College, not only for employees, but also for our students, we offer a number of health services that are available, not only mental health, but physical health as well. Some offer legal help, whatnot. It just depends on what you need. Some offer just counseling. So an employee assistance program can help. And what you're doing is you're creating a secure environment for your employee where they feel safe and they feel taken care of. They feel safe and taken care of, they're less likely to commit fraud. Okay, so here we go. There's the 5 ways you can eliminate fraud. Good internal controls, discouraging collusion, monitoring employees for and providing a hotline for anonymous tips, expectation of punishment, and proactive auditing. So internal controls, you've got to have those internal controls. That's just all there is to it. If you have it, they will try to steal it. And so you've always got to be assessing that, going through and looking at, is everything okay? Is there anything we could be doing better? Assessing and minimizing risk could be segregation of duties. If you can't segregate the duties, then you need to have proper internal controls, balance, checks and balances put into place. So I could be doing the bank reconciliation, then I'm going to hand it off to somebody else with all the information right there. And they can turn around and they can do their double check that I completed that bank reconciliation correctly and that there's no funny business going on with deposits or checks disbursements. Authorizations, physical controls, independent checks, and documentation. Document everything. So they have all of this here, and most of this is pretty, self-explanatory. Proper documentation. So that's also part of the audit process. When I worked at Cocopah Indian Housing, the checks that I received, I purposely had the check numbers put on the checks. So granted, the computer can do that for you. Any computer software can do that for you, but I had those check numbers numbered before we use them. So sometimes I would accidentally leave those checks in the printer. And maybe I was printing checks earlier and I forgot to take them out. Then I hit a report. And guess what? Now my report has been printed on a bunch of checks. So I would have to void every single one of them. I did not throw them out. I saved those voided checks and I put them in a file because when the auditors came in, they wanted a list of my check register. And if they saw any variances, meaning like if I had any skipped numbers, they would ask to see those. And so I provided it to them, showing that there wasn't any funny business going on with that. Okay, so they're talking about control activity. So here we go. We've got, this is receiving products, making sure that something's acceptable from a vendor or not. And then the second one is calibrating and refurbishing different types of equipment. Okay, so the quality testing, you're going to want to make sure only certain people are allowed to enter in that acceptance. And then in the second one, you need to be tracking that refurbished tool or whatever it could be. Maybe you provide some type of air tag on it and you scan it as it goes through the system. I mean, for crying out loud, right now, if I wanted something at Home Depot, I can type it into the home and make sure I use this local Home Depot as my home Depot. And I can say, where is it? And it's going to tell me where it's at in the store, because those employees are scanning that when they're loading it into or putting it on the shelves, they're scanning it and putting it into a certain place on the shelves at Home Depot and they're logging that information in. So they know where all of their inventory is at any given moment. And that should be probably something that Company C does. Okay, so here's preventative and detective. Discouraging collusion. That one's kind of difficult, but because that involves multiple people, and those are some of your highest losses when it comes to multiple people involved. I mentioned to you about the San Francisco Giant lady who, if it was me, I would have terminated the entire payroll team because she was buying them purses and luggage and remodeled a kitchen, paid off credit card bills, took them out to dinner, took them on vacation, with all of this money that she stole from the San Francisco Giants. So that was a big old huge collusion. So you're gonna, those are kind of hard to discover. So you're gonna have to, be very observant, on the lookout for that. You're gonna also have to have an open door. I ran into somebody one time. We had a publisher come down, and it was me and another person, and we were talking to the publisher about changing the current textbook. And this person who was new, I was new too, but this person who was new made this comment of, what are you going to give me? I need a new tablet. So if we use your textbook, are you going to get me a new tablet? And I about wanted to hit the guy upside the head. And because I said to him, I said, this is a government entity. We can't do that. That's a kickback. And this guy was going to teach some accounting courses. And I was like, what are you thinking? This is total fraud. You can't do this. And so I said something to him because he wouldn't shut up. And then I said something to him after. And yes, I even went to the boss and said something to the boss, because that's collusion. That's fraud. Yeah, we can't get kickbacks. We're not allowed to. We're a government entity. I mean, any entity. Other entities that I've worked at, like, I'm really hesitant to receive gifts from students. One time I got a $50 gift card and I was so bummed. I went to my boss and I said, I got a gift card because if it's something small, we're allowed to take it. Like if somebody buys me a candy bar or something like that. But a $50 gift card to a really nice restaurant. And I showed it to him. I said, I'm going to have to give it back, aren't I? And he said, yep. I said, yeah, I thought so. I said, I just want you to know that I received it and I'm going to give it back. Because I was CYOA. Because if somebody said, well, where did she do with it? Well, my boss could say, no, I know she gave it back because she came in and told me this was what she was doing. But I can't get that kickback because theoretically, even though that was an A student anyway, somebody could have said, well, he got an A only because he gave the teacher something. So we have to be really careful with that. When I worked at other government entities, we had a dollar threshold that we were allowed to receive as a gift. It's like $20, except unless it was a gift that can be received by the entire company as a whole. Like, for example, we had an office supply vendor that would bring us cookies at Christmas time. So that was more than $20, but because everybody was getting a cookie, it was fine. Okay, making sure everybody knows it's a right to audit with the purchase relationships. Just, knowing that at any time I can double check things. And vendors and customers, they may feel a little bit more secure because sometimes, like that, a poor publisher was feeling pressured that he had to give something to my colleague in order to get, for us to use his textbook, and that was not right. Okay. Employees do not commit fraud and hoard stolen proceeds. Pay attention to their lifestyle. Remember, I talked about the San Francisco Giants lady. The most common way that you discover fraud is through whistleblowing, whether it is a publicly traded corporation or not. Have a way to have a whistleblowing program. The effective whistleblowing programs are anonymous, independent, accessible, and you know that somebody's going to follow up. Not all whistleblowing will find fraud. I've had cases where a disgruntled employee a previous employee went and made a complaint to a federal entity that we were not using the grant money appropriately. And we had the Auditor General come down and do a spot audit. We were fine. They found nothing wrong. But there's the expectation that they're going to come down and they're going to investigate. And then you need an expectation of punishment, that if you are committing some type of fraud, that you will be punished, whether that's termination, criminal, civil, prosecution. Making sure that that is written down, that that can be the expectation. And then if something does happen, that you do follow that expectation, people are going to take notice, and they're going to be less likely to commit fraud. I know in a previous video, I made a comment about this one man. He was a psychopath, and he committed all kinds of frauds against people. And they asked him why he no longer commits fraud. And it was because he had gotten caught, and he didn't want to get caught again because he didn't like going to prison. Fear of punishment. Make sure you have a proactive fraud auditing. You're always looking for signs and symptoms. Make sure you just have a procedure in place. This is what we're going to be continuously looking for. Doing that assessment is going to help you eliminate the fraud. Here's a summary. Comprehensive approach to fighting fraud. Prevention, detection, investigation, and follow-up. Normally, you're going to have an entire, like for me, previously, it would be something that, I would be talking with multiple people. Like when I was discovering that people were stealing at a retail company, I would be going to talk to human resources and the manager, and there would be a number of us, and we were discussing, okay, what's happening here? Can we pinpoint who it is? Is it true? How much money are we losing? Da, 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 da. And we would go into, we would analyze everything, and we would investigate it. And then we would make a determination, what are we going to do? Company Q recently learned that 10% of its gross revenue was being lost to employee fraud. Company Q has no fraud mitigation program in place and assigned you to be the new full-time fraud mitigation officer. Oh, okay. They want us to just list stuff. Change your policies and procedures. Make sure you have a good organizational culture. And then they have in here a whistleblowing program. And so here they're talking about the current model. And, this one is pretty self-explanatory. And I'm also going to, a lot of this I mentioned was money. I have seen, and I have an idea of who I think took it. I've seen new computers get legs and go walking out the door. I think I know who took it, or I think I know the people that may have been involved in taking it, but I had no proof. So it's not just cash. And so here's a better fraud fighting approach. And I really like this. The tone at the top, going to educating and training, having your integrity, risk and controls, reporting and monitoring, proactive fraud detection, and then your investigation and follow-up. Important takeaways. Every organization will have some fraud. It happens to the best of us. What happens with the best of us get hit? Normally, they can find it pretty fast. I even know of some people in government entities that said they were going on travel, and then come to find out they never went, but they submitted all their receipts and whatnot, said they paid for it out of pocket, and they submitted their receipts to get reimbursed. And when the investigation began and when it ended, it was determined that it was a collusion It can be, it happens. So you just got to stop it. You got to nip it in the bud right at the top. And right here it's talking about the fraud, the amount of fraud in an organization and what it depends on, which is everything we just talked about. And self-assessment. I'm not going to do self-assessment. Here's our summary, takes you back to the objectives. And then I go, oh, I'm done. Anyhow, so there is chapter 4. And I will see you in chapter 5. I hope you are enjoying this as much as I am. If you have questions, please send them to me. Whatever you need, that's fine. I will answer as best as I possibly can. I do not mind. If you have questions on your homework, please send them to me as well. And so we'll see you in chapter 5.